In this video, I am going to show you how to use the graph below to answer the following questions. And what we're going to be doing is evaluating our function based on a couple values that were given and find either the input that's missing or the output that's missing according to the function values that are given. So as I look at this picture over here, I'm taking a look at just kind of a couple parts of the graph. I notice that the first part of the graph, part A, is decreasing, and then B starts increasing, but then part C increases at a faster rate, and that at some point here it begins to stop increasing and then it starts to decrease again. So it says find the output values, which would mean the Y value, when the X value is equal to 14. So the function notation for that would be f of 14, or f of x is normally how we write our function notation. And so what it's saying is to substitute in for your x is the value of 14. So on my x-axis, I'm going to look for the number 14 and find that point on my graph, and I see the point 14, 8. Now what's given to me is the x value, so what I'm looking for is the y value of my point, which would be the 8. And now in this question here, find f of 22, the notation is f of x, so that means I'm given the point 22, comma something. Now find that value that was missing. So now again on my x-axis, I'm going to find 22, go up to where my function is on my graph, and I'm going to see that the y value here was 18. And so since 22 was given to me, I was looking for the missing value, the y value of 18. Now look at what's opposite here. So find the x value. So the x value is now what's missing, and instead I'm given the y value of 12. So what would be the x value with an output of 12? So notice how inside the parentheses was 22, and notice how inside the parentheses was 14. Those inputs are x values. And notice how this 12 is not inside the parentheses, it's outside, which means that the 12 is your output, meaning the y value. So now I'm going to go over here and look at my y-axis, and I'm going to find the value for 12. So here's 12 on my y-axis, and I'm going to go over to my graph, and I'm going to find the x value that coordinates, which would be the number 16. So in this case, I found an x value of 16. Now it says describe the domain and range of the function f in the graph. And so domain is our x values, and range is the y values of our function. And we want to write these in order from least to greatest. Now, as I'm looking at this picture, I see that my x-axis, my graph, spans the entire x-axis that was labeled for us. So from left to right, I notice that the leftmost value here spans on my x-axis a value of 0, and on the right side, the rightmost point would be a value of 26 on the x-axis. So my graph spans the entire grid here that was labeled out for me, 0 to 26. But now as I'm looking for the range, what I want to do is find the lowest value to the highest value. Now I do notice that this point is the lowest point on the graph, and I notice that this point is the highest point on the graph. So part of my grid up top that's up here is unnecessary. So according to my y-axis, because my range is my y's, the lowest value that my outputs could be is 0, and the highest output I could get is 20. So a 0, now again, this is y values range, 0 to 20. So essentially what I'm saying is this section of our grid was unnecessary to have. We don't need it because our graph doesn't go up that high. So that's why I say to 20, not to 26. Now there are some additional questions down here at the bottom where it says use the graph to find each function value listed below and then do the indicated operation. So notice there's an operation here of addition and then an operation here of multiplication. So f of 3. So if I have f of x for the notation, that means I'm given 3 comma something as a point on the graph. So really what I'm searching for is the missing y value of this point. So I'm going to find on my x-axis the number 3, so right in between 2 and 4, and I'm going to find that point on my graph and find that missing y value, and that missing y value is 5. And then likewise here, if the function notation is f of x, what I want to do is note that I'm given an x value and I'm looking for the missing y coordinate of the point 8 comma something on my graph. So on my x-axis, I'm going to find the number 8, and that point on my grid is 8 comma 0, so the missing y value was 0. Now, this point on the graph is going to be 18 comma some unknown y value, and this point on the graph is going to be 3 comma some unknown y value, and then what I'm going to do is find those values and then add them together. Because if our function is f of x, I know an x of 18, and f of x, I know an x of 3. Now look at this one here. Didn't we just do f of 3? I already know that y value was 5. So I'm going to plug that in here. So that's one of the values I need. Now 18, I'm going to find 18 on my x-axis, and I'm going to go up to find the point on the graph, which would be 18 comma 16. And now what I'm going to do is take those two values, the 16 and the 5, and my operation is to add them together, and I get a value of 21. Now I have one more like this where it says f of 0, so very similar each of these in pattern. This means f of x. So 0 comma what value is a point on your graph. So I'm looking for the y value. So if I find the point 0 comma something on my graph, that point is 0 comma 8. So the missing output value is the number 8. For this question here and this question here, notice how it is exactly opposite of what we've just done. This one says x, meaning find the missing x value if your output, so notice how this 2 is not inside parentheses, it's outside, so the output we know is 2. So this is exactly opposite of what we had been doing. So find the missing x value that has an output of 2. So in this case, I'm given the y of 2. So now what I'm going to do is find what x value has an output of 2. So now on my y-axis, I'm going to find 2, and I'm going to go over and see what point on my graph that could be. Oh, look, there are actually 2 places where you get an output of 2. So one of those inputs could be a 6, and the other place where you get an output of 2 would be an input of 10, meaning there is a point 6 comma 2 on the graph, and there is a point 10 comma 2 on the graph, both having an output of 2. So the input x of 6 and the input x of 10 would give us an output of 2. In this case, we were finding x values. So again, find the x value when the output is 12. So that means this point is going to be something comma 12 on the graph. So on my y-axis, I'm going to find the number 12, and I'm going to go over to where my function could be, and this point is 16 comma 12. So I found the missing x value of 16. Now I have 3 more questions here. It says, out of these labels A, B, C, and D, which one is part of the label of the graph that increases the fastest? Well, this section here is increasing and it's going up 1 over 1. So B, the rate of change here is 1. But then here, part C, it goes up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. So that rate of change, or your slope, is 2, which means C is faster because 2 is more than 1. And then the question here for what label of the graph is decreasing, so which section of the graph goes down? Well, there's actually 2. This initial starting label of A, our graph is going down, and The final label over here, this section D, is also a decreasing section of that grid. All right, now I have one more question, and I'm going to find the function values where x is equal to 5 and x is equal to 4, and then I'm going to multiply them together, kind of similar to what I did here, but instead of the operation of addition there, I'm going to multiply here. So if this is f of x, I'm going to find the point 5 comma something on my grid. I'm going to find the point 4 comma something on my grid. And what I'm going to do is multiply these two values together. So over here, I'm going to find my x value of 5. So here's 5 on my grid in between 4 and 6. And that output would be a value of 3. And then I'm going to find my input of 4, which would be here. And that output would be the number 4. And I'm going to take my 3 times my 4 and get a value of 12.